So now we're moving into tapeworms, and tapeworms are another kind of big hitter that we're going to see with our horses. And so these are going to be located in the ileocecal junction of the horse's GI tract. That's kind of where they hang out and live. And so for those of you who might not be familiar, the ileocecal junction is the connection between the ileum, or the final part of the small intestine, and then the cecal portion is referring to the cecum. And so looking at our image here, the cecum sits on the right side of the horse's kind of flank area, and what we're going to see is, so the blue here is representing the small intestine. And so there's this small little hole where feed stuff travels from the small intestine into the cecum. And these tapeworms are going to latch on at that point. And so ultimately what we see with this life cycle is mites are involved, which at first kind of shocked me. I'm like, mites? Like, do we have mites? And really, if there's any nice green, kind of more lush pasture, your mites can be present there. And these mites go and they pick up these tapeworm eggs, and they develop in the mites for a couple of months before the horse consumes the mite, and these infective tapeworm eggs or larvae are going to be released. And so once there, they go and they attach in that ileocecal junction, and they kind of are like little accordions. It was the first time I saw it in a necropsy, it really intrigued me because they can be really short, and then they can just extend out and get really, really long, and they don't know what triggers that change in size. But the issue is that is a pretty small gap in the horse's GI tract. So if there's an abundance of tapeworm parasites that are living there, it can ultimately lead to a blockage at that site. But as these tapeworms become reproductive, so here's an example of what it might look like. This side is what's going to be attaching to the lining of the GI tract. It has different segments of the tapeworm. And so this is this gravid segment that has a bunch of eggs in it. And here is one, it's mature, but eggs have yet to be developed in it. So this tapeworm attaches to that part of the intestinal lining, and then it'll just release a segment with eggs in it that will then be deposited in the feces and the manure, and then continue that life cycle. So another parasite we're going to see from grazing pasture, from horses being out on pasture, and really some things to consider is that horses do not acquire immunity. This is a parasite we see throughout life, and so this is a parasite we really want to pay attention to, because we can see colics or impaction colics, right? We can see those resulting from a heavy tapeworm burden. And so what they found through research is they found that if a horse has an ileocecal impaction, it is very likely it's associated with a tapeworm infestation, right? Or this high tapeworm burden. However, there are so many horses out there who have tapeworm burdens who aren't having these ileocecal impactions. So kind of the thought is, just because your horse has tapeworms doesn't mean they're going to have this type of impaction colic. But if they do have that type of impaction colic, odds are it was caused by tapeworms. And so kind of a little tricky between association and causation on differentiating the two. But our problem with tapeworms is that they're not accurately identified in a fecal egg count. You can see them in a fecal egg count, but more than 90% of infective horses are missed. And that's when you use this McMaster's method. And during this method, you're going and just kind of mixing your feces, like a subsample of your feces, in with this flotation solution. Any eggs that are rising to the surface is what you're viewing under the slide. They have started testing a centrifugation method. So using that centrifuge, spinning it down really fast, you use a bigger sample of feces, and they have found that has been more likely to detect these tapeworm eggs. But now you need a centrifuge. It's a little bit more of a tedious process, but nice if we can find them. Over in Europe, to my knowledge, they have a salivary test and I believe a serum test as well to determine if the horse is infected by tapeworms. Unfortunately, we don't have access to that in the United States. I messaged a few parasitologists and they're like, yep, you're out of luck. For a while, I guess Europe did allow people to send saliva tests over, but then there were concerns about rabies and kind of that, not biosecurity, but kind of zoonotic potential for disease transmission that that was concerning. So then they shut that down. But a lot of places in Europe do require or recommend that these tests are performed before you deworm for tapeworms. We can't do it over here. We have to kind of blindly deworm, but I just found that very interesting. So that's a little bit about tapeworms. We are going to want to make sure we're deworming for them, and I'll talk a bit about it more, but a praziquantel dewormer is typically what we're going to give to the horse after they're done grazing for the fall in order to combat those tapeworms. And the thought of that is if the tapeworms are an issue, it often happens over winter as these tapeworms kind of fester there and they get bigger and bigger. And so let's deworm them when we pull them off pasture so they shouldn't acquire any additional tapeworms. Hopefully that dewormer takes out all or most of them. And then that gives the horse kind of a break over the winter before they're back out grazing in the summer again. In addition to praziquantel, a double dose of pyrantel has been shown to be effective too. For the longest time, they were entirely effective, but we have been starting to see resistance. So while they are beneficial, they're not guaranteed to work.